Hey guys, it's Deacon Matt, and I'm here again with another installment in our series on prayer. I originally conceived of this series last week, and I thought there'd be 4 videos in it, and this is number 6, so we'll see how many more I do. But this time I want to respond to some questions that I get quite frequently whenever I talk about prayer. And the questions all kind of fall within the same genre of questions, I guess the type of question, and that's, can I do this while I'm praying? Whatever that might be, right? Can I do my homework while I'm in adoration? Can I read a book in adoration? Can I knit in adoration? A lot of them have to do with adoration, because adoration, you're kind of sitting there and it's quiet and there's not necessarily a liturgy or something, going on. But sometimes I'll get the same questions about, praying at home, doing the rosary. Can I do this at Mass? Can I whatever? And the answer is always going to be either yes or no, depending on the, what it is that you're talking about doing, but also depending on the context and the nature of your prayer. So rather than talk about anything specifically in this video, I wanted to just kind of lay out some general principles for us to keep in mind anytime we're considering, should I do this thing? Can I do this thing while I'm praying? And it reminds me of a story that I heard, and I can't remember the original attribution of this story, but the way that I remember it, it was a seminarian, and he's approaching his formation director, and the seminarian was a smoker, and so he wanted to know if it was okay for him to smoke while he's praying his breviary, his office in the morning. And the formation director says, no, you should be focused on prayer. You can't smoke while you're praying. But then the next day, the seminarian came back to the formation director and he asked, is it okay to pray while I'm smoking my morning cigarette? And the seminarian, the formation director said, oh yeah, absolutely, you can pray while you're smoking. St. Paul says we should pray without ceasing, so that's good. So it seems like he's getting 2 different answers here, right? But on the one hand, he said, can I smoke while I'm praying? And on the other hand, it's, can I pray while I'm smoking? And the emphasis is, on either the smoking or the praying, depending on how you phrase it. And I told the story recently, and a student said, well, Deacon Matt, you shouldn't smoke anyway. It's not good for you. That's not the point. And I don't smoke, but for me, it's more about coffee, right? When I pray my morning prayer at home, usually there's a cup of coffee next to me because I'm still trying to wake up. And coffee has actually kind of become part of my morning prayer experience. But this isn't just semantics here, right? There is a real sense in which both of those things are true. It kind of just depends on your emphasis at that particular moment. Because St. Paul did say you should pray without ceasing. And that implies that we should be able to pray while doing anything else, whether it be smoking or drinking coffee or studying for a test or driving your car or, going for a walk, getting some exercise, whatever we're doing, we should be able to pray while we're doing those things. Because again, going back to our very first video in this series, defining prayer, prayer is a raising of your mind and your heart to God. It's thinking about and desiring God. And we should be doing that all the time, regardless of what other human activity we might be doing. But that being said, we also need in our lives dedicated times where we're just focused on prayer, where we're just focused on directing our minds and our hearts to God. And we need those dedicated times of prayer in order to train us, so to speak, to pray all the time. We would never be able to pray all the time if we didn't pray in a more focused way at certain times. And I like to think of it kind of as a date time with God. My wife and I have been married for 20 years, and we're around each other all the time. And so if I ask, can I have a conversation with my wife? Can I talk with my wife while I'm checking my email, while I'm watching something on television, while I'm washing the dishes, while I'm, reading the newspaper? Yeah, sure, I can talk to my wife while I'm doing all of those things, and I frequently do. But if I'm going on a date with my wife, if I'm taking her out to a nice restaurant and the intention is I'm going to spend some quality time focused just on her, and I pull out my phone and I start checking my email on my phone or looking at Facebook, is that a good thing? Or if I hate those restaurants that have the big TV screens, up on the wall. If I'm distracted by what's going on those big TV screens and I'm looking at the TV and I'm not looking at her, is that a good thing? No, because my attention is being divided and it should be focused just on her. So the same thing is true with our dedicated prayer time. We want to avoid doing anything that's going to distract our attention from God, that we, where it should be focused. So if what we're talking about doing, whatever it might be, is going to distract us from God, we shouldn't be doing it. But if it's something that might help us to focus on God, then it's generally going to be okay to do. So I'll use an example. My wife likes to knit, and knitting, occupying her hands by knitting, actually helps her mentally focus on something. So if we're attending a lecture or something like that, a lot of times she'll bring her knitting along and she'll knit because occupying her hands helps her to focus on the lecture or whatever. So it would be okay for her to knit, while she's praying. Now, I don't know how to knit. So if I was going to learn how to knit and I'm still trying to figure out the ins and the outs, and I tried to do that while I was praying, I would find that to be a huge distraction. And so I wouldn't, of course, do that while I was praying. So sometimes students will ask me, they'll have like, if they'll have like a little fidget devices or whatever, as a way of occupying their hands, and that helps them to focus. Can I do that while I'm praying in adoration? Sure. Do that. Do that while you're praying in adoration. But the other thing to consider is the context of our prayer. Is this public or private? If it's something that you're doing in private and you're the only one that's there, then the only one you're concerned about is yourself. Is this helping me to focus on God? Then, okay, yes, I can do this. But if you're praying in a public setting, you also have to think about the people around you. Is this going to hinder them from being able to focus on God? Is this going to be a distraction for them? So again, use the example of my wife and her knitting. Even though that might be something that helps her mentally focus, she's not going to bring her knitting to Mass, because she knows if she pulls out her knitting in the middle of Mass and starts knitting, it's going to be a huge distraction to everybody that's around her, and she has to be considerate to them. So she doesn't do that then. So if you're talking about, can I do this thing during Mass? Can I do this thing that is during adoration or during a group rosary or whatever? Think about, are there other people there? Right? Is this going to be a distraction to those other people? If it is, don't do it. Don't do it, okay? So these are the things to kind of consider. Can I do this thing while I'm praying? Are you talking about praying in a general way, in the sense that St. Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians, of praying without ceasing, that we should be doing throughout our day? Or are you talking about a dedicated time of prayer when your focus should be more directly and intentionally on God? That's a consideration. Is this thing that you're talking about doing going to help you to focus on God? That's a second consideration. And then if this is a public prayer, is this going to be distracting to the other people who are also trying to pray and focus on God? That's a third consideration. So if you're thinking about, can I do this thing during prayer, whatever it might be, just consider those three things, and that should give you a very good indication as to whether or not that would be appropriate or not. So, thanks for tuning in. I hope these little prayer tutorials have been helpful and something that will improve and benefit you in your own prayer life. Praise be Jesus Christ.